Special shout out to Nancy Nelson. Every day she's going to be coming down to the church at 5 o'clock to ring the bells for 15 minutes. So if you're in the neighborhood and want to hear the church bells ring out the story of the songs of Christmas, come on down. It's just a beautiful time. The other day I was out there and listening to the bells, and while I was there just listening to the bells over the darkness and seeing people roll down their windows as they passed because they were hearing something and they could hear the bells. And then I would look across the parking lot and I would see families who gathered in front of their windows, and they would open their window and they would just for 15 minutes, they would freeze themselves out, but they would be listening to the bells, just listening. And I knew that it was giving them such joy. There's something about the ringing of bells that bring joy. It reminds me when I was a child and a candlelighter in church on Sunday morning, and my dad would say, "Bobby, would you like to ring the bell for church?" And there's this big bell tower. And I would go, and the rope of the bells was just that thick. It was just so big. And this was the highlight of my life back then. And I would just crawl up a little bit, and then I would bring my weight down. It was a large bell. I would bring my weight down, and I'd have to do it a few times, and then the bell got going, and it began to dong, calling people into the worship of God, to the good news of the message of Jesus Christ. But what they didn't see, part of that message, was a little boy who would get thrown up into the air by the rope, and my legs would just be going like this. I'd go way down, dong, and it was the most fun to do that. And so I associate bells naturally with joy, and our theme for Advent right now is joy. And I'd like to tell you something that happened just the other day in Brainerd, Minnesota. You might have already heard this story. It happens every once in a while. Somebody might come through the window at a Dairy Queen to make their order. And then they'll look up and they'll say, "And I'd like to pay for the person behind me." I says, "Okay." And then when that person came through in Brainerd, the person said, the person who just came there wanted to pay for you to have your meal. And then that pause, that look of, well, then I would like to pay for the person behind me. Now, the manager says that she has seen this a few times in her work time, and it usually goes on for 15 to 25 cars. And it's a beautiful thing, she says. But there's something about these days, these COVID days, that changed the way that this happened in Brainerd at the Dairy Queen. Because it went on for 2.5 days, solid. 2.5 days. I'd like to pay for the car behind me to have a meal. That show of kindness. And the person, the first day, the last person through the drive-through window said, "Okay, I would like to pay for the first person in the morning." And that's how it continued for 2.5 days. 900 cars going through the Dairy Queen rent window. And there's two things that happen. There's the impact of the people in the cars, that sense of experiencing grace and kindness during these times, where they're not just looking out at their own safety, but they're thinking about the person behind them and how much joy it brought to them. But there was a change in the workers' mindset inside when they had to, oh my gosh, so many times they had to clean and clean and clean and clean, disinfect, and make all of these changes in how they served the community. They were in tears. Every hour there would be tears of, "I can't believe it." Another 15 people came through and they paid for the person behind them. And it changed their perspective. It changed their sense of hope. It gave them joy. I often think of what I would do if somebody gave me $1 million. I know my first thing, I would pay off my student loans. But after that, at this point in our lives, I would take that money and I'd wrap rolls of cash for $5,000 or $10,000, and I would go to as many hospitals and nursing homes as I could. And I would just give the money to the nurses and just looking into the eyes and saying, "Thank you." I have seen so many reports, and so have you, of nurses who are just crying. He says, "I don't know if I could go on I mean, it was in the early days of the pandemic, they were esteemed as heroes. They were clanging of pots and pans as there was a shift change. And now they've seen so much death and so much pain. How can they go on? They're just suffering. And I just wanted to find some way to pay joy forward through these tears and through this suffering. To be able just to give them some money and to say, thank you. I know your tears. You're experiencing things that I am not, but I empathize so deeply. I feel what you're feeling. As a culture, the only thing that I could think of that comes near to this present pandemic and the skyrocketing amounts of every day a new record is set for number of cases and deaths is that moment in time when our nation was impacted by 9/11, the destruction of the Twin Towers in New York. And within an hour, we had called our congregation together at the church and to stand under the bell tower and to sing, to pray, and to ring out the bells. And going home, we were still in such a state of shock, but we had the bells of the church ringing in our ears. That somewhere within the pain, somewhere within the tears, there is embedded joy. Psalm 126 talks about this exclusively. This was a people who were coming out of exile. And they're saying, do you remember when we first heard, when we gathered our possessions and we ran out the door because we were in Babylon and we were longing for so many decades, longing to return, and we got the word, now is the time, go. And we were so happy that the news that our circumstances had changed, all our reaction was just laughter. And the psalm goes on to talk about what is sown in tears grows into joy. Joy out of tears. Within the tears are the seed for joy, as the joy that we experience always contains the tears, always. There's this link between our humanity, being able to show caring and love and concern, open up so that we're not just a self-protective shell. One sociologist said, what we see and what the cynics say, yeah, this is always the case, see in terms of human hatred, war, envy, strife, jealousy, revenge, is not our natural state. The natural state of humanity is love and joy. But that when we are hurt and wounded, then the unnatural thing comes. We seek then to lash out and to seek revenge, either physical revenge or verbal, or just the way we esteem each other. So as we think about these bells, we think about the baby Jesus as the ultimate bell that peals forth in our world. That the only way we could truly see the baby Jesus, it's not just as a happy birthday, Jesus, you just turned 2,000, but as a way of being able to say that the only way we could see the baby truly is through the cross. That is in the forefront. As we look upon the manger, we look upon the Christ who is the suffering one, who comes to bleed out the love in order to heal us and to bring us that joy. And we see in the foreground the empty tomb open, that this Christ has conquered death. Death dies. And we see then a little more deeply into that manger, what Paul calls the secret plan of God, that through Jesus Christ, heaven and earth will sing in harmony, and all will be well. And to paraphrase the poem by John Donne, don't ask for whom the bell of the Christ child tolls. It tolls for thee. And all the people say, Amen.